Welcome back to the hot seat. Today, delighted to be joined by Camilla, Dell and Casper Walls from Black Brick. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you. Good to see you.
For PCD members who don't know Camilla, I mean, she's got a fantastic reputation in the industry. So if you've been under a rock for the last 10 years, you might not have come across Black Brick. But Camilla, why don't you just introduce the firm that you founded and what it does for clients?
Thanks, David. So I'm Camilla Dell. I'm the managing partner and founder of a business called Black Brick, which I set up in January 2007. We are predominantly a buying agency. So we specialize in advising and looking after and working on behalf of private clients who are looking to purchase residential property, mainly in central London, but we also help clients who are looking to buy in the home counties as well. And our business model is, if you like, the total opposite of an estate agent. We're very focused on advising the buyer, ensuring that our clients end up finding the right property for them and acquiring that property on the best possible terms. And the business has done tremendously well over the last 14 years. The team has expanded. We're a growing team, soon to be 9 consultants, advising and guiding clients right the way throughout London. We have successfully acquired well in excess of £1 billion worth of residential property for our clients over the last 14 years. And I'm really proud to say that we've been recognised as one of the leading independent buying agencies out there. And that's the story.
Terrific. Well, thank you for that background. Today, we're going to be tackling and busting real estate myths. We've got a number of points here which are common misconceptions in the market, and we're going to put a little counter up the top so that you can see them as we go through. So just coming to number one, why do I need a buying agent? You know, an estate agent is working for me if you're the buyer. That's a common misconception. Camilla, why don't you take that one on?
It is a common misconception. Why do I need a buying agent? Estate agents, surely they're working for the buyer as well, because they're taking me around in their car and they're giving me lots of good advice and sharing their knowledge. And it's an easy trap to fall into. But it's one that we're really keen to emphasize. Buyers do not fall into that trap. Always remember that the estate agent is working for the seller. They are getting paid a commission, a fee, by the seller, and it is their job to try and sell properties that they are instructed on primarily, and to try and sell those properties for as much money as possible, because their client is the seller, and that is their job as the estate agent. As the buyer, by dealing directly with an estate agent, do not fall into the trap that the estate agent is working for you. They are not. An analogy that I really love to use when trying to describe people why use a buying agent is it's a bit like going to court. I don't think there's many people out there that would ever consider going to court and trying to represent yourself in court and not having a lawyer. And I think the same can be said of the property market. The seller is there, they have their agent, the estate agent. The buyer needs to have professional representation in the form of a buying agent, and that's where we come in.
Okay, thanks. Myth number 2, perhaps, Casper, this one's for you. Why do I need a buying agent? If you're in touch with all the agents, if people are registered with a variety of agents, what value does it add?
It's a great question. I mean, I think if we took that question the other way around and said, why not? At Black Brick, over the last few years, we have probably saved our clients 4 to 5 times the amount of fee that they've paid us. So just that alone is a great reason for using a buying agent. But also the market that we're dealing with, the rise of the independent agent has made it more and more difficult for the buyer to make sure that they are speaking to all of the right people all the time. And it's that access to market that I think we also bring, as well as the advice and the ability to save them money.
Okay, thanks. Well, what about number 3 for clients who know areas very well? I mean, Camilla, you know, would someone query why they need a buying agent if they know every intricate part of London that they think they want to buy in? What's your perspective on the knowledgeable, clued up buyer?
It's a type of profile buyer that we've seen a lot of during the pandemic, because a lot of our clients over the last 12 months have been domestic clients. And a lot of those clients have been clients that understand the market, they live in the area where they want to buy in, they're in touch with all of the right estate agents, but even having done all of that work, they're still not bringing their search to a successful conclusion. They're not finding the right house, or they're finding the right house and they're not being successful at trying to acquire it. So there is still real value in using a buying agent, even if you know the area really well, and even if you're in touch with all the right agents. And I'll give you a really good example of this. It's a property that we just exchanged contracts on last week for British clients in Dulwich. Dulwich is a part of the market that has seen a lot of increased activity as a result of the pandemic. People now want space, they want houses with gardens, and areas like Dulwich have really benefited from that. At the same time, there's really not a lot of stock available. Sellers at the moment in the pandemic are not that keen to put their properties onto the open market and have lots and lots of viewings in the middle of a pandemic, which you can understand. So there's a shortage of supply, but there's a lot of demand, making it a very difficult market for many buyers. These British clients engaged us, and within a very short space of time, we had identified a property for them completely off market. And what we did for this client is we targeted specific roads in Dulwich that we knew would work for them, and specific houses on these roads. And we dropped letters in, and we had a positive result from somebody that we dropped a letter into. It's not a touting letter. When we make private, discreet approaches on behalf of our clients, we are the buying agent. And so for some sellers, that is an ideal scenario. They're not having to pay us a fee. They can sell their property in a discreet way without having to go onto the open market. And it's a win-win situation, both for our client and the seller. And so to go back to your question, even if you know the market really well, you won't know it as well as your buying agent, and you certainly won't have the same sort of access to off-market properties that we do.
Okay, thanks. And Casper, number 4 for you. I mean, on the negotiation side, I mean, the perception that surely properties are overpriced, I should just go in 10% below the asking price. What kind of value would a buying agent add to that kind of process or mentality?
Yeah, and it's something that we often hear, and I totally agree with you. I think what's really important is that clients of Black Bricks must be informed, and by being informed, they can make the right kind of decision. And what they need is information, and what we can provide them with is solid, comparable sales evidence for similar properties that have sold in that street, in that building, in that neighbourhood over the last 6 months. And we can build a picture as to whether the asking price as given by the agent or the developer, or if it's off market by the vendor, whether that asking price is reasonable. And looking at the data, we can then come up with a strategy for our clients where we can hopefully negotiate and try and achieve the best possible terms. And I think that's a much more evidence-based way of working than just knocking off 10% from an asking price and going from there.
Okay, thanks. Well, Camilla, what about properties that have been sat online for some time, gone a bit stale perhaps? Is there necessarily something wrong with that property?
Brilliant question. The honest answer is there could be, or it's just a case of a property having sat online because the market's quiet. It could be price driven as well. We are still in quite a price sensitive market, and if a property comes onto the market at too much money, typically buyers tend to ignore it. So it could be a number of different factors. And what I always say to clients is, just because a property is on the market and on a portal doesn't mean it's not worth considering. It could be the right property for you, and it could be that the seller of that property is really, really motivated and might take a significant discount on their advertised price. You just don't know. So just because a property has been set on the market a long time doesn't mean necessarily there's something wrong with it. However, you do need to tread cautiously. There could be a good reason why it hasn't sold that's not visible just from looking at the details on a portal.
Okay, thanks. And Casper, what about off-market properties and coming across clients with a preference for off-market properties because it's better? What would you think about that kind of statement?
I mean, often clients think to themselves, it's off-market, it must be more exclusive, it must be more desirable. And sometimes that's the case. In fact, over the last couple of years, last year, for example, 1 in 5 properties that we acquired for clients was off market. The year before, it was just a bit more than 1 in 4. So that grey market, as people are sort of calling it now, is growing and growing and growing. The issue for buyers sometimes is that that property hasn't been market tested. And therefore, as a result of that, it can actually be more expensive than, let's say, buying a property that's been on the market for 8 to 12 weeks. What you tend to find is that the more unique and certainly the higher the price of the property, you'll see more and more and more of that off market. But just to focus on that alone is probably not the right strategy.
Okay, thanks. And Camilla, what about the perception that buying agents are only for the super rich with mega super prime properties? At what point do you find you add value as a buying agent?
I mean, I think we add value to all buyers. And I would love the buying agency service to be completely universal and accessible to everyone, including first-time buyers. One of the things that I decided to do really early on when setting up BlackBrick was to actually have a really low minimum. Our minimum, and this sometimes really surprises and shocks people, is £500,000. That is our minimum criteria to become a BlackBrick client. The reason why we set it so low is for a few reasons. Some of our investor clients like to buy smaller properties. We've had some clients that we've looked after for many, many years, and over time, they want us to go on and source properties for children. And we just want to be able to help more people. So I think it's a misconception that buying agents are only for the super wealthy. The truth is the majority of work that we do for clients is on properties priced between 1 and 10 million. That's really where we're most active. Of course, every now and again, we do some super prime deals up at 20, 30. Our most expensive transaction or highest value transaction was at 55 million. But that is not everyday business for us. The majority of work that we do is lower price range. And I think ultimately a buying agent service would be great if it could be for everyone, because I think all buyers would benefit from it.
Okay, thanks. And Casper, one for you here, number 8, which is if someone hasn't sold their house yet, but they're worried about finding the next one, should they start looking, making offers, getting engaged in the process? What would your take be on that kind of position?
It certainly, the pandemic has caused for, transactions to take longer than ever before. Certainly, if people are using mortgage finance, then actually the process of the deal going through can take many months. So it is something that's definitely worth them, moving forward with. But, and being in a chain is not unusual in London. Having a property to sell and trying to acquire another property is not unusual at all. But certainly getting on with that process of making sure that your property is on the market and being viewed, however you're doing that, whether that be openly with an agent, via portals or off market in this sort of grey area that we were talking about previously, getting forward with that is really, really important because it makes you a more proceedable buyer. Sellers who are trying to sell to you will be much more encouraged if they know that you can actually move forward and do the deal.
Okay, and I mean, Camilla, just on the fee point, if someone was saying, well, looking at a buying agent's fees and saying the fees are high because they're not used to paying for advice in that way, what's your comeback on that?
Look, I think buying a property for many people is one of the most significant purchases that someone makes in their life. For a lot of people, their property is their most valuable asset. So my argument to people with the fee discussion is, most people wouldn't dream of investing in the stock market without taking proper advice. And the same is true of the property market. Why would you risk your most expensive asset that you own without paying a professional to advise you properly, to make sure that you really are buying the best property you could have found and paying the right price for it? I think our service more than pays for itself in terms of the value that we bring, and making sure that our clients don't make what could be a really, really costly mistake.
Okay, thanks. And Casper, what if a client is being told by an estate agent that they have to use their recommended professionals, lawyers, surveyors? What's your take on that kind of situation?
It's a difficult one. I mean, the easy answer is to say that you must never ever do that. That's the easy answer. But actually, I don't necessarily think that's always the right answer. It may well be that estate agent is recommending somebody who is actually really good. But I think you need to get a second opinion, and you need to ask yourself, why is that person being recommended? Are they being recommended because actually they're going to make the life of the estate agent just easier, or are they going to represent you, the buyer, and do a really good job? And that's what the question you've got to be asking yourself.
Okay, thanks. And Camilla, if you've got a client who's buying a new build and they're skeptical on getting a survey, what would you take to that kind of sentiment?
It's a common mistake. So many buyers think because they're buying new build or because they're buying a property that's brand newly refurbished, they don't need a survey. That is a mistake. There are so many things that to the untrained eye look fine, but actually you scratch beneath the surface and there could be some serious problems there that you would want to be aware of before exchanging contracts. And on a new build, once you've exchanged, then trying to retrospectively get the developer to put things right can be really, really difficult. So it's much better to get your survey done, understand from the surveyor what the issues are, what the snags are, and ensure that the development puts those things right. And it's written into your sales contract to ensure that they do those things. Otherwise, there's a lot of sorry buyers that we meet that didn't do that and then bitterly regret it because they discover things once they've moved into the property and it's too late. So really important to get a survey, even if the property you're buying is in fantastic condition.
Okay.
That question always makes me, reminds me of what's always become an urban myth story from when I was an estate agent before I joined Blackbrick 10 years ago. And a lady bought a newly developed apartment and she decided not to have a survey. It looked like it was in immaculate condition. And she moved in, and on the first night, she went to go and plug something into the wall, and there were plug sockets on the wall. She plugged it in and nothing turned on. And she moved around the apartment, plug to plug to plug, nothing worked. And the developer had never wired the apartment.
Wow.
Always get a survey.
Yeah, absolutely, makes good sense. And Casper, just thinking with you, I mean, when in a hot property market, people can often get gazumped, or there's complex chains. I mean, perhaps most people in the UK are familiar with gazumping, but maybe explain the term and also what people can do if they are gazumped. You know, what would your advice be to a client in that situation?
Yeah, so gazumping is where you've agreed the purchase of a property and then the seller decides to pull the contract from you and to go to another buyer who, normally speaking, is offering more money, but may also be offering to do that deal quicker. Question one, so I always say to clients, point one rather, is to stop and take a breath and to decide to yourself, actually, do I want to try and move forward with this property? Is this still something that I want to purchase? Because emotion can take over and you can start to try and chase the purchase, spending more and more money, not just the actual money to buy the property, but lawyers' fees and surveyors and banks and things like that. You actually got to step back and decide, is this what I want to do? And if it is what you want to do, then ask yourself, how can I best achieve this without spending more and more money? It isn't always about the money. Often what sellers want is certainty. And actually, maybe you have been taking too long over the transaction. Maybe it is something that is actually your fault. But just chasing it can be really, really dangerous. And in hot markets, it happens. It's a very brave thing for a seller to do, though, I would say, because actually there are many buyers out there who, the moment you try and extract more money from them, they just walk away. And although you've got somebody else who is wanting to pay more money, the other party, they can easily walk away too when they realize that perhaps they've let emotion get hold of them and they're paying too much for the property. So it's a dangerous game for the seller.
So thanks. And one for you, Camilla. The agent has advised that the offer is too low and probably isn't worth submitting. What would you recommend to someone in that position, Camilla?
Well, the first thing is make sure that you submit your offer in writing. Whenever we submit offers on behalf of clients at Blackbrick, we make sure that they don't just go across verbally, that we write a formal offer letter to the agent setting out who our client is, what the offer level is, their timescales, any inclusions, who their lawyers are, how they intend on financing it. We set everything out in writing so that offer is taken very, very seriously. But crucially, submitting an offer in writing, legally, if you do that, the agent has to submit that to the vendor. So by submitting an offer in writing, the estate agent then has to send it through to the vendor. So don't just do things verbally on the phone. Make sure that you put forward proper offers in writing.
Okay, thanks. And Casper, in the situation where buyers had a survey, numerous issues have come out, what should their strategy be around discounts? What do you think they should be doing?
This is a real minefield, because first of all, from the seller's perspective, when the surveyor's report comes through, the surveyor's report is actually a defect report. It is there to highlight the issues in the house or flat that you're buying. And the first question is, were these foreseeable? If somebody is selling a derelict house, for example, and the survey comes back with lots and lots of issues, well, that's completely to be expected. And so as a buyer, you can't then use that survey report and say, well, look, actually, there are all of these issues. I'd now like a discount. However, on the other end of the spectrum, if the property has been recently developed or it's a new build, you would expect it to be in very, very good condition. And so if your survey comes back and there are lots of issues, then that's something you can go forward to the seller with. So the next bit is, how do you cost that up? How do you work out what any kind of reduction in price should be, because something has come up in your survey and it wasn't foreseeable when you walked around the property when you had a viewing? What you really need there is to get a trusted contractor to come round and to give a sensible overview of the works that are needed in order to remedy whatever the issue is. But it's difficult because the seller and buyer may have very, very different views on this. And that's really where you need a really good agent, a really good buying agent, a really good selling agent, who can actually keep the lines of communication open and get to an agreeable position so that everybody can move forward. But surveys are very, very difficult. And often the results come out several weeks after you've already agreed the purchase. Lawyers have already been engaged. You may have had your bank survey go through the door. As a buyer, you've already incurred quite a lot of cost. And as a seller, you've already spent quite a lot of time, and then you get some bad news. So you need good agents to get over that sort of bump in the road.
Okay, thanks. And Camilla, if you have the situation with a property owner considering renting out a property, they see that as a sort of medium term solution, and they don't foresee any issues with what might happen down the line. I mean, how might you discuss that with them, the idea of whether they'll rent a property out?
I always say to my clients, when you're buying a property, you're either buying it for yourself for your own use, or you're buying it for investment. I think trying to marry the two things up often has problems. You know, for example, we've got some clients that think they can buy a property in London, rent it out on short-term lets or Airbnb, and then when they visit for a few weeks in the summer, it will be available for them. That would be a mistake. Firstly, from a legal perspective, you're not actually legally able to short let a property for more than 90 nights a year. So that's not really many income generating nights for most clients to make it worthwhile going down that road. Secondly, you know, even if you do buy into a building where short lets are allowed, the income is going to be really patchy. It's really difficult to try and work out, you know, what your outgoings are and what your ingoings are when you short let a property. And secondly, there's no guarantees that the property is actually going to be ready for you when you want to use it. So there's going to always be that risk. Short letting properties is also really management intensive, and the fees are really high. You can't keep any of your personal belongings in the flat. So I always say to clients, if you're planning on having it as a rental investment, it's much better to have a long-term tenant in there than it is to try and short let it. Having said that, with long-term tenants, something to be aware of at the moment because of COVID is, if you want to suddenly get that property back and take possession, you can't just serve your 2 months notice on your tenant in the way that you used to be able to. There's been a change in law which gives tenants more rights. You now have to serve them at least 6 months notice to terminate that tenancy. So tenants now have much, much longer before they need to move out of a property. And you certainly, in a national lockdown, can't just take possession of your property whenever you want to. So again, these are things that are worth bearing in mind if you're planning on renting your property out. The last thing I'd say is make sure that you have a really good professional managing agent. Most of our clients don't want tenants ringing them up in the middle of the night saying that they have a leaky tap or the boiler's not working. And also when you have to have difficult discussions with clients, certainly if they're not able to pay their rent because they've been made redundant, those sorts of discussions are always so much easier if you've got a professional intermediary representing you.
Okay, thanks. And Casper, for those buying intending to renovate, perhaps put new flooring in, windows, make some changes, and they consider that something they've done after the purchase, what's your recommendation around that kind of thought?
So I think, making sure that they've done their research before the purchase is really, really key. What you don't want to do is buy a property with grand visions about what you're going to do to renovate it, and then find out that what you'd actually planned isn't allowed at all. So making sure that you've had advice before exchanging contracts from the right kind of people is really, really important. At BlackBrick, clients often want to put their own stamp on properties, and that might be just internal redecoration, but that might be doing a basement or extending into the loft. We always make sure that we have spoken to the right people, taken the right planning advice before those things are considered, so that actually once the purchase is made, we know that everything that's been agreed is there and in place and ready for us to get on with.
Okay, thank you. And Camilla, the final myth we're going to tackle today is if the client is being offered a discount, but is it really a discount? Does it really represent value? How do you approach that statement?
Yeah, I think buyer beware. And I think this happens a lot, particularly on new build. The developer will say, look, our asking price is X, but we're offering 10 or 15% discounts at the moment for early bird reservations. And I think you need to be very careful as a buyer, without a buying agent guiding you on this, to really understand, is that a real discount in real terms? And really the only way to assess that is to analyze it. You need to try and look really carefully at what other similar properties have sold for recently. Getting hold of that information, particularly at the moment, because there's not that many transactions going through, is really difficult. So it's a tough one. I think particularly with new build, it's often very difficult to get hold of the data of what actually has been sold in that development. And that's the only way to really understand whether you're getting a true discount. When we put offers forward for clients, we collate a lot of comparable sales data. This is also where our relationship with developers and agents comes in very handy. Even if things are not openly available on land registry, that doesn't mean that sales haven't been agreed. And we're very good at trying to get hold of that information so we can properly assess whether it's a true discount or whether the asking price was just inflated to begin with, and it's a grey discount, if you like.
Well, thank you for chatting to me today, doing some myth busting around the real estate sector. We look forward to sharing this with our members. So thanks very much for joining me.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David.